Hello again, my fellow Jeti users, and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's little Jeti Clinic videos. This is the day after Christmas Day, and I can tell what some of you have had for Christmas because on the evening of Christmas Day I had a couple of requests for a little bit of programming help. And so today I've got round to making videos to help people with it. And the first request is with a glider. And our user has a thermal mode and cruise speed mode, as well as cruise mode, yes, but wants to be able to tune the amount of downward travel on a flap in the thermal mode. And so I'll make some assumptions here, is that you want to be able to tune the downward travel of ailerons as well, because you're using them in thermal mode. If you're not, it doesn't matter. You'll see how we set up both of them as we go along. I'll also assume that the modes have been set up and they're using flight mode trim to get these cruise and speed modes, because if you've been watching my videos, you would have learned that's how I would have done it. And so hopefully that's the way you've done it as well. And we'll add a little bit of cherry on top of the cake at the end and show you how to do the same thing in the speed mode with a different tuning knob. So you can have one knob tunes the amount of thermal and the other knob tunes the amount of speed mode as well. Why not? And you'll be able to tune them in both directions. So when you go into thermal mode, you get a certain amount of downward travel on the trailing edge. So the tuning knob will allow you to increase or decrease from that amount, and the same in speed mode. So let's dive in, have a quick look at how it's set up, just so you know where we're coming from. And if you've set yours up differently, well, you'll see what's going on here. And so you might have to make any adaptations if you've done a different setup. So if we have a look at model, function assignment, there's the flaps, but no control is assigned. Okay. Servo assignment, you don't need to do any changes. I'm just going to show you changes I've made that make it easier for you to see in the video. In other words, I've shuffled the servo assignment around so that both ailerons are on the same line, and below that both flaps are on the same line. See, you don't need to do it. I'm just explaining why my servo assignment might look a bit different how yours comes out. And it's done purely to make it easy to see when we use the servo monitor. You can see what's going on more easily. Okie doke. In fine-tuning flight modes, I've set up 2 additional flight modes. I've got speed flight mode and thermal flight mode. I'll leave the default flight mode as our cruise mode. Okay, and then in flight mode trim, we've come in here. We've changed the ailerons and the flaps to separate. So if I go from default up to speed mode, we've got +10, +10. And if I go to thermal mode, we've got -10 and -10. The numbers you put in will be entirely up to your model. I'm just using these as sample figures. Okay, and let's have a look at what effect that has on the servo. So we'll go into servo monitor. I'll go into thermal mode. Notice the servos only move 5%. I'll come to speed mode. See, they're moving 5%. Why? When we've set 10% here as the number. The clue is in the word trim. Flight mode trim, the trim buttons, digital trim, 1% has only 0.5% effect on servo travel. So 10% trim moves the servo 5%. Whereas if you change a 1% in anything to do with controls, so that's in the function curves, in dual rates, or in the servo setups themselves, 1% there means 1% servo travel. But if it has the word trim, it's 0.5%. So that's why 10% there gives 5% travel. Okay. Right, let's have a look at how we go to adjust it. And there's actually a clue in the question that I was asked, is how can I use one of the controls to tune the amount? Because in the butterfly flaps menu, there's something called tuning, and that's what we're going to use. Now, come down here, and we want a control set. because if you do all the remaining work in here, nothing will happen and it'll be very frustrating. And it's because it's just no control means it's just off. So anything we set up here won't work. So what do we want to set as the control? Well, it's not the switch to switch between the flight modes. And the control we want to set here is the log max control, so it's permanently on. Now, if we set log max here and then change the mode to separate, that log max will be on in every flight mode. Whereas if we change it to separate and then come back here in a particular flight mode and set log max, it will only apply in the flight mode. If we wanted it to apply to each of them, we'd have to go through every separate flight mode, changing the control to log max. But the tuning themselves are going to be per flight mode, so it doesn't matter to me that I set the log max control first and then change to separate, because even if it's there in the default flight mode, because I'm not setting anything per flight mode there, it's not going to have a problem. So to save myself doing any more, I'll just choose that, come to log max, which is at the bottom of all the logical switches, set that, say OK, and now if I come across here and set the flight mode to separate, I can switch between flight modes and we'll see that the max control is there in every one of them, because we did it that way round. Okay. If you set flight mode separate, then we'd have to come back and set log max in the thermal mode. And if you do want tuning in the speed mode, we'd have to set log max in speed mode. So I've simply saved myself one setting up of log max. That's all I've done. Okay, but if you don't set log max, i.e. on, the rest of this simply won't have any effect, and you'll get very frustrated thinking, why is it not working? Why is it not working? Okie dokie. So come into tuning. Now the control for tuning in the mode is going to be, we're going to use P8. So I'm going to use this knob here, set it back to about 0 for the moment, as my tuning knob in thermal mode. So it's very important, because I've set it up per flight mode, that I set this to thermal mode first. Thermal mode. Now I can set my control. Say, before we say OK, look at this. It's going from 0 to 100%. We don't want that, because that'll either, depending how we set it, only increase the amount of downward travel or decrease the amount of downward travel. We wanted it to work from both ways so that we can try a bit more or a bit less. So we need to switch on a center. Switch on a center. Now you see it goes from minus 100 to plus 100. Say OK to that. And now we come down to the ailerons and the flaps and the elevator, but we're only going to work on the ailerons and flaps. How much travel do we want to give them? Well, remember that the actual servo travel is only 5% that we've set up. You may have set a flight mode trim of 20%, which would give you a servo travel of 10%. And I'm going to suggest that you don't want to use a number any greater than that servo travel. Not the flight mode trim, the servo travel. Why? Because if you reduce the amount of thermal mode flap that you've got, you don't want it to go above the neutral point, because then you'd be going into speed mode. You don't want to do that. So I'm going to suggest that we set as a maximum 5%. Make sure we're still in thermal mode, because if we allow it more than that, we'll end up actually going into reflex or speed mode. Okay, let's have a look at how this all comes into effect. Let's go back to default mode, cruise mode, and look at the servo monitor. Okay, now let's swing the P8 knob. So here's P8, I've set as my tuning, and hopefully nothing is happening. Keep swinging it, there we are, look, see, there's the ailerons, there's the flaps, nothing's happening. We're in default mode, cruise mode. I'll go now to speed mode, and I'll rotate the knob, and still nothing's happening. Lovely. So the great thing is that in speed and cruise mode, the knob is not having any effect. I'll put it roughly in the middle and we'll go now to thermal mode. There we are. Now I'll rotate the knob. There we go. You see, we can increase or decrease, but we won't go back above 0. Lovely. Now, that's all very well looking at the monitor whilst we're doing this. But you don't know now where the knob is whilst you are flying around watching the model. So let's say OK to that. Say OK. Come out of here. Go to Advanced Properties and Sound of Proportional Controls. We'll say Control P8. That's the knob I've selected. Look at that. And Mode Center Beep. Say OK. Let's go back into Servo Monitor. There's a little beep. So imagine you're flying the model. You've started off with the tuning knob at the center position, having no effect. You've gone into your thermal mode and you think, I'll adjust it now. Okay. You're making some adjustments. And you think, do you know, I preferred it actually back where it was when I started. But where is that? Remember, you're not looking down at the screen. You shouldn't be in this screen anyway. You're looking up at the model, which could be at some distance up in the sky. So you can start gently rotating the knob, not too quickly, and listen. There you go. Stop turning the knob. If you think you've gone past it a bit, you can just slowly turn it back. There. Okay, so even if you overshoot, just rotate the knob backwards a little bit till you get the beep. Okay, and if you've rotated the knob to reduce the amount of tuning, and you think, nope, again, I think I got it right just in, selecting my 5% travel. Rotate the knob back till you hear the beep. There we are. So now you know you're back at center. Okay, so that's answered the question I was asked, but I said we can put a little bit of cherry on the cake here. If we go back to butterfly flaps, and we come down into tuning, and now we'll come out of thermal mode and we'll go up to speed mode. See how no control is set. We'll go back to thermal mode. There's a control set and there's values there. But because we've set it separate per flight mode, there's a new screen for every flight mode. So we come to speed mode. Let's choose a control. And this time I'm going to choose P7. Okay, so we go in there, rotate P7. Remember, we don't want it to go just one-sided. We want both sides. So we switch on a center. So it'll go from negative values up to positive values. Say OK to that. And it so happens that we set 10% in the flight mode trim, which gave us a 5% servo travel in speed mode as well. So once again, I'm going to suggest you don't want to set a value beyond your servo travels, because you don't want to accidentally turn your speed mode into thermal mode. So it just happens to be the same value I stuck in as an example. So again, we'll set these to the 5% servo travel. And let's have a look at the numbers here. Tell you what, we'll switch on center beep as well whilst we think about it. So back to advanced properties, sound of proportional controls, and this time P7, say OK, center beep, say OK to that. Let's have a look now then. Swing it back to nil. There we go. Okay, so let's have a look. Cruise mode, nothing's happening. I'll rotate P8, has no effect. I'll rotate P7, no effect. We'll go to thermal mode. I'll rotate P7, it should have no effect. Good. Put it back to neutral. I'll rotate P8 now, which was the one for tuning. Thermal mode, there we are. Now we'll come back to default or cruise mode. I'll go to speed mode. I'll rotate P8, should have no effect. Now I'll rotate P7, it should tune it, and there it goes. So there you are. You can have separate tuning knobs to tune both your speed and thermal modes. Have fun with that.